A poor widow begged, "Please bury my child." The mountain man's response will shock you. The sun died early that evening. It sank behind the jagged teeth of the Bitterroot Mountains, bleeding red light across a sky already heavy with snow. The wind rose out of canyons like a cry, low, mournful, endless, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and loneliness. In that frozen wilderness, a single figure moved against the storm. A woman bent forward, half swallowed by white. Her shawl was threadbare, her skirt stiff with frost, and every breath she took sounded like it might be her last. Her name was Sarah Whitmore, though no one had spoken it kindly in years. She stumbled forward, clutching a bundle close against her chest. A gray blanket, limp, small. Inside it lay the still weight of her daughter, Willa, no more than 5. The child's head lolled against her mother's shoulder, her lips colorless, her lashes dusted with ice. "Hold on, baby," Sarah whispered, her voice torn by the wind. "Mama's almost there, just a little longer." But the wind took her words and scattered them like ashes. For 3 days, Sarah had walked. She'd eaten nothing, slept little. Her world had shrunk to one desperate rhythm. Step, stumble, pray. Behind her lay Silver Creek, the town that turned its back. She could still hear their voices, cruel and righteous. Ain't nobody helping a woman who laid with an Indian. That was her sin. That was her curse. When her husband, Kedun, the Comanche who'd once saved her life, died at their hands, the town had spat at her feet. When Willa's fever came, they slammed doors and turned away. So Sarah left. She followed a rumor, a story overheard between sacks of grain at the general store, about a man living deep in the mountains. Once a Union surgeon, now a ghost. They said he'd gone mad after the war, lived alone with his hound, shunning God and men alike. They called him Elias Boone. The mountain man Sarah didn't care if he was mad. She cared only that he might have medicine or mercy. By the time she reached the high pass, the world was more ice than sky. Her boots slipped on rock glazed with frost. She fell, crawled, stood again. Every muscle burned. Her arms ached from holding the child. Still, she clutched tighter, as though her grip alone could keep her daughter's spirit tethered. "Just a few more steps," she murmured, staggering. "Please, God, not yet." But then she felt it. The stillness. Willa no longer trembled. Her small chest, once fluttering like a bird, had gone quiet beneath Sarah's palm. "No," Sarah breathed. "No, no, no." She sank to her knees, the snow swallowing her legs. Her hands fumbled at the child's cheek, her mouth. No warmth, no breath, only the cold weight of finality. A sound tore from her throat. Not a scream, but something lower, older, the sound of a mother breaking. She pulled the child to her chest, rocking her as the snow fell thick around them. "Please, not her," she sobbed, voice cracking. "Take me instead." The world didn't answer. Time blurred. Minutes or hours, she didn't know. The snow piled high, covering her shawl, her hair, the small gray bundle in her arms. Somewhere in the distance, through the roar of the storm, a faint light flickered, orange and unsteady. Smoke, a cabin, in the pines. Sarah forced herself up. Her knees buckled. She fell, crawled, rose again. Every movement was pain. But she moved, for the same reason she kept breathing since the world turned cruel. Because love refuses to die, even when everything else does. The light grew brighter. Smoke curled upward, blurred by wind. She reached the clearing, stumbled through thigh-deep drifts, and collapsed against a door of rough-hewn logs. Her fist, numb and bleeding, lifted once. Knocked. The door creaked open. Warmth spilled out, golden and impossible. A tall man stood in the doorway. A beard thick as snowmelt pines, shoulders wrapped in a buffalo hide coat. His eyes, gray as forged steel, flicked from her face to the bundle in her arms. For a moment neither spoke. Then Sarah's lips parted. Her voice was barely sound. "Please bury my child." The words broke on the last syllable. Her knees gave out. She fell forward into the light. The man caught her before she hit the floor. His name was Elias Boone. He hadn't spoken to another living soul in almost a year. Not since the war ended. Not since his wife and son were burned alive by settlers who called her Apache blood-a-stain. He'd built this cabin with his own hands, high above the valley, 1 room, 1 fire, and 1 companion, an old bloodhound named Grizz, gray-muzzled and silent. He'd buried his name along with his family. The man who opened that door was no doctor, no healer, just a ghost wearing skin. Until now, he knelt beside the fallen woman. Her pulse was weak, her face wind-burned, eyes swollen from crying. But the child drew his focus like gravity. He peeled back the gray blanket, his hands rough but careful. The girl's skin was pale, her lips tinged blue, lashes rimmed with frost. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Nothing. Then he felt it, faint as wind through reeds. A breath. His heart jolted. He bent closer, ear to her chest. There. A beat. Weak, but there. He looked back at the woman, then at the open door and the snowstorm raging beyond. "She's still breathing," he barked. His voice startled even him, hoarse from disuse. He lifted the child, his arms sure despite the tremor in his chest. "Come on," then, "Move." The door swung shut behind them, sealing out the blizzard. For the first time in years, Elias Boone's cabin was filled with something other than silence. Hope. Elias moved fast, instinct overriding the rust of solitude. He stripped off the child's frozen clothes, wrapped her in wool near the hearth, and stoked the fire until it roared. He poured hot water into a tin cup, dipped a cloth, and pressed it against her neck, her chest, her hands. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. "You got fight left in you. I can feel it." From a shelf, he pulled a bottle of whiskey, not for drinking, for reviving. A few drops between her lips, massaged gently down. Then he pressed his palm to her small sternum and began to rhythmically press. Breathe, press again. The woman, Sarah, lay half-conscious by the fire, her skin ashen. He threw a blanket over her, glanced back once, then turned to child. "Breathe," he whispered. "You've got a stubborn heartbeat. Don't waste it." Grizz padded closer, head low, whining softly. The child coughed. Just once, a soft rasp, but enough to make Elias freeze. He leaned in. Her lips quivered. A wisp of air, warm, alive, brushed against his fingertips. He sat back slowly, exhaling for the first time in minutes. His body shook, not from cold, from memory. From the ghost of his own child's still body in his arms 9 years ago. From a feeling he'd sworn never to feel again. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You're safe." The fire burned high, painting the walls gold and red. The storm outside beat against the cabin like a dying drum. Hours passed. Sarah stirred. When her eyes opened, she didn't know where she was. The heat on her skin felt unreal. Then she turned her head, saw the bearded man crouched near the hearth, fingers gently brushing her daughter's damp curls from her face. "You saved her," she whispered. Elias looked up, startled to hear another human voice. He hesitated, then nodded once. Sarah's breath hitched. Tears welled, froze, fell again. She tried to speak, but no sound came. She didn't need to. The gratitude in her eyes said everything. Elias looked away quickly, uncomfortable, as though unworthy of being seen. He cleared his throat. "Don't thank me," he muttered. "I haven't saved her yet." It was the first thing he'd said to another living soul in almost a year. Outside, the storm screamed on. Inside, 3 broken hearts, one dead, one dying, one barely alive, began to beat in the same rhythm. By dawn, the snow had stopped. The world outside was white and silent, the kind of silence that hums in your bones. Inside, Elias watched the firelight flicker over the small face of the child he'd pulled back from the edge. Her breathing was shallow but steady now, her skin warm again. He reached for a small glass vial from an old crate, a tincture his Apache wife had once made from pine sap and juniper. He uncorked it, dabbed a few drops beneath the girl's nose. Her chest rose slightly, a tiny sound escaping her throat. Sarah stirred again, half waking. Her eyes found him, tall, scarred, weary, and something in his stillness steadied her own. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Elias hesitated, his voice rough. "No one worth knowing." "You saved my daughter," she said. "That makes you someone." He looked down at the child. "Then I'll be someone until she's out of danger." The fire cracked sharply, startling the silence. Sarah blinked hard, fighting tears that had frozen too long inside her. "What's her name?" Elias asked, eyes still on the child. "Willa," Sarah said. "Willa Rose." He repeated it softly, a name on the edge of a prayer. Then he leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "She'll need rest. So will you." Sarah nodded weakly, but her gaze lingered on him. In his face she saw exhaustion, yes, but also something fierce, unyielding, human. The kind of man the world breaks but can't quite destroy. Her voice trembled when she spoke again. "You didn't have to open the door." "No," Elias said. His eyes flicked toward the storm-worn planks. "But you knocked." A mother walked through hell to bury her child, and a broken man found the courage to open his door. Out there, the snow kills without mercy. But inside that mountain cabin, for the first time in years, mercy breathed again. The storm had passed, but its ghost lingered in the trees. Wind still whispered to the pine needles, shaking down soft clumps of snow that landed like sighs on the roof. Inside, the cabin breathed warmth. The fire burned steady, shadows shifting along log walls lined with scars and memories. Elias Boone sat near the hearth, elbows on his knees, watching the child's small chest rise and fall. Each breath was a miracle he didn't quite believe in. Her mother, Sarah Whitmore, lay wrapped in a wool blanket a few feet away, half asleep, her fingers still curled toward her daughter's form like a prayer. It had been years since Elias had shared space with another soul. And now, somehow, there were two of them, one fragile, one fierce, sleeping under his roof, warming his house with the same kind of human noise he'd spent a decade running from. Elias reached for the kettle hanging over the fire. The handle burned his palm. He hissed softly, more startled than hurt. He poured water into a cup, then sat back against the wall. His reflection shone in the tin, a face lined, eyes hollow, beard gray before its time. 9 winters ago, he'd returned from the war to find his home in ashes, his wife and boy gone, murdered by men who said she'd tainted him with Apache blood. He'd buried them himself, 2 graves side by side, and sworn that day never to heal again. He thought he'd kept that vow. Until a knock on the door changed everything. He looked at the girl now, Willa. Her lips twitched faintly in sleep, as if chasing a dream she'd forgotten. Something about the way she breathed, shallow but stubborn, reminded him of his son. And that hurt. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Don't you die, little one." Not after she came this far. By dawn, the fire's glow had dimmed, but warmth still clung to the air. Elias dozed in the chair, chin on his chest, when a soft sound woke him, a whimper, faint but sharp. Willa's breathing had changed. Rapid, shallow, wrong. He was on his knees in an instant. Her skin burned hot beneath his hand, too hot. Her tiny frame trembled. Her lips had gone pale again. Behind him, Sarah stirred, blinking. "What's happening?" "Fever's back," Elias said curtly. "Lungs are tight. She's fighting to breathe." Sarah scrambled to her knees, clutching her child's hand. "Is she dying?" Elias didn't answer right away. He was already reaching for a box of small cloth bundles, his old field supplies, packed away but never thrown out. Each pouch held herbs, bark, fragments of a life he'd tried to forget. He opened one, sniffed it, shook his head, chose another. Wild sage, rabbit tobacco, he muttered. Good for lungs. He tossed a handful into a pot of boiling water. The smell filled the cabin, bitter, earthy, strange. Sarah coughed. That's medicine? It's what I have left, he said. She watched him unroll another small pouch, this one filled with smudged charcoal and white ash. He placed a mixture in a clay bowl, lit it with an ember, and let the smoke curl gently around the child's body. Sarah's eyes widened. You use their ways, she whispered. The Comanche. Elias glanced at her sharply. I learned from someone who believed in both, he said. Before they took her. He didn't mean to speak the name aloud, but it slipped out like breath. Naira. Sarah looked up. Your wife. He didn't meet her eyes. She was Apache. Taught me half what I know. Herbs. Smoke. The language of breath. She's gone. His jaw tightened. They called her savage. Said she turned me wild. Said I betrayed my kind. He paused, grinding bark into powder. But she was the only soul who ever looked at me and didn't see a monster. The pestle stilled in his hand. She believed the earth could heal anything if the heart let it. He poured the mix into the steaming pot, stirred, and leaned over Willa. Breathe, little one, he murmured, waving the steam toward her face. Breathe, same as the mountain. For a long time, nothing happened. Then a cough. Then another. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Elias pressed his palm lightly over the child's ribs, felt movement. Faint but alive. She's fighting, he said softly. Sarah wiped her face with her sleeve. You're the first person who didn't turn his back on me. He looked into the fire. I already did. Once. I won't do it again. That night, as the storm calmed, the fever spiked again. Sarah woke to Elias's voice, low, urgent, steady. Stay with me, girl. Come on. Come on now. She sat up, heart pounding. Willa's breasts were shallow, her small hands twitching. Then silence. Her world stopped. No! Sarah gasped, shaking her. No, no, please. Elias grabbed her shoulder. Lay her down. Sarah bayed, tears streaming. Please, save her, please. He reached the thin reed he'd carved earlier, a hollow tube made from elder stalk. He tilted Willa's head, slid the reed gently into her mouth, and began to breathe through it in short, controlled bursts. Once. Twice. Again. Sarah prayed, voice breaking. Lord, please, not again. Please, not again. Come on, Elias muttered, his own breath trembling. You're stronger than this. Come on, little one. Seconds pass like hours. Then a sound, a choke, a gasp, a cry. Willa's cry, hoarse, weak, but unmistakably alive. Sarah crumpled forward, clutching her daughter, sobbing. Thank you. Oh, God, thank you. Elias sat back, drenched in sweat, eyes wet though no tears fell. He whispered to no one, not this time. By morning, the fever had broken. Willa slept, her breath even. The fire had burned low, the air thick with herbs and wood smoke. Sarah sat beside her daughter, fingers brushing through her hair. Across the room, Elias sat sharpening a knife, the rhythmic scrape the only sound. She watched him, his stillness, the way his jaw flexed but never spoke. He looked like a man carved from the mountain itself, and yet, somehow, more alive than anyone she'd met in years. She cleared her throat softly. You could have turned us away. He didn't look up. Should have. Why didn't you? He paused, met her eyes for the first time. Because when I opened that door, I heard myself in your voice. Sarah frowned. Yourself. The part that begged someone to save what I loved, he said quietly, and nobody came. Silence stretched long and heavy. Then she whispered, "Thank you for coming this time." As the days passed, snow melted from the roof in slow rivulets. Willa grew stronger, color returning to her cheeks. Elias began to speak more, short sentences, rough but honest. He taught Sarah how to brew pine needle tea, how to dry bark properly for fever. She listened carefully, asking questions, eager to learn. When night came, they sat by the fire, each pretending to focus on tasks. She mending, he carving, but both acutely aware of the other's breathing. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. "I used to believe God had a plan," she said softly, "that every hardship meant something." Elias looked up. "You don't believe that now?" Her lips quivered. "I believed it until they beat Ketan to death." Elias said nothing. "He saved my life when I was 16, she continued. "Led me home through a storm like this one. I fell in love before I understood what that meant. My father was a preacher. The night Ketan came to ask for my hand, her voice cracked. They didn't even let him speak." Elias's eyes darkened. "I buried him myself," she whispered, "with my hands. In the dirt. I was carrying Willa. The town called me unclean. I gave birth in a goat shed." The fire popped sharply. When she looked up again, tears streaked her cheeks. "I thought God forgot about me." "About us?" Elias's voice was low, almost reverent. "He didn't. He sent you to knock on my door." Sarah's breath hitched. The two sat in silence, their pain flickering in the same flame, burning low and steady. The following morning, Willow woke fully, eyes open, clear, alive. She looked at her mother first, then at the tall, bearded man sitting by the fire. "Pa!" she whispered, confusion soft in her tone. Sarah smiled through tears. "No, darling. That's Mr. Boone. He helped you." Willa blinked at him. "You saved me?" Elias froze, unsure what to say. Grizz lifted his head, thumping his tail once. "I just kept you warm," Elias said finally. "Your mama did the rest." The girl smiled faintly and reached out her hand. Her fingers brushed his rough palm, small, trusting. Elias swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. He hadn't felt small fingers like that in 9 years. Sarah saw it, the shadow in his eyes, the pain he tried to hide. She placed her hand gently over his. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me back my whole world." He didn't speak, but he nodded, once slow, sure. By evening, laughter, small tentative, filled the cabin. Willa giggled at Grizz, chasing his tail. Sarah hummed a lullaby in Comanche, her voice low and clear. Elias sat in the corner, carving a small wooden figure, a horse with uneven legs. When he finished, he handed it to Willa. She hugged it to her chest, beaming. "It's perfect." He smiled faintly. "Not yet, but maybe we'll be." Sarah met his gaze across the room. "Maybe we all will be." A man who had sworn never to heal again found his hands remembering. A woman who had buried her heart found it stirring. And in a cabin high above a frozen world, a child's breath became the sound of grace, a promise that even in the coldest hearts, warmth waits to be found. The mountain lay hushed beneath its blanket of snow. Days had passed since the storm broke, but the world still glimmered white, quiet, as if afraid to breathe too loudly. Inside the cabin, life moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Elias Boone chopped before sunrise. Sarah Whitmore tended the fire, brewed tea, and hummed to her daughter. The sound of child's laughter, small, delicate, alive, now threaded to the air like smoke. For the first time in a decade, Elias realized the silence of his home had changed. It no longer weighed. It warmed. That evening, Willa slept curled in furs beside the hearth, one small hand gripping the wooden horse Elias had carved for her. Sarah sat close by, mending a tear in her dress with neat, practiced stitches. The lamplight softened her features, tired but kind, lines of sorrow etched alongside traces of strength. Across from her, Elias sat cleaning his old rifle, though his gaze drifted more toward the fire than the barrel. They had spoken little in the past day. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was something gentler, a shared quiet, like two travelers resting on the same stretch of road. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. I used to believe grief was a punishment. Elias looked up, wary. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, she continued. Fallen in love with the wrong man. Asked too much of God. Maybe that's why he took everything away. Elias set the rifle aside. That's what they teach. That loss is earned. It isn't. Her fingers stilled over the cloth. You sound like you know. He let out a rough breath, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. I buried two. My wife, my boy, both killed by men who called themselves righteous. Sarah didn't flinch. Because she was Apache? Elias nodded once. They said she bewitched me, said I was a traitor. I came home from the war and found nothing but ash. For a long moment, the only sound was a fire. Then Sarah's soft whisper. I buried one, too. The man I loved and the life we should have had. They looked at each other then, truly looked, and something wordless passed between them. Recognition, the kind only the broken understand. Elias rose, fetched the kettle, and poured 2 cups of pine needle tea. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, the contact brief but electric. Sarah met his eyes. You still wear your ring, she said quietly. He glanced down. The silver band on his left hand, blackened by years of labor, caught the light. It won't come off, he muttered. Or you won't let it, she said softly. He didn't answer. For a while, they drank in silence. Outside, the wind swept against the walls, steady, almost soothing. Then Sarah said, Tell me about her. Elias looked into the fire. Her name was Naira. She could read the sky, said clouds had voices, laughed at how serious I was. She taught me to listen to the land. I didn't understand half her words, but I never felt more understood. Sarah smiled faintly. She sounded like she loved you without trying to change you. He nodded. She did. That's what made it hurt worse. Because I couldn't save her from people who thought she was less than human. The flames reflected in his eyes, glinting off tears he wouldn't let fall. She died believing I'd stopped them. I didn't. Sarah reached out, placed her hand over his. You were one man against the world. That's not failure. He looked at her hand, warm, alive, small compared to his, and didn't pull away. It was her turn now. The fire crackled as she drew a shaky breath. My father was a preacher in Cottonwood Valley, she began. We had a small church, 1 room, whitewashed walls. I used to sing hymns by lamplight, thought the world was kind. Her eyes unfocused, lost in memory. I met Ketan when I was 16. He saved me from wolves. Tall, quiet, kind eyes. We couldn't speak each other's words at first, but somehow we talked for hours. I thought God had sent him. Elias's brow furrowed. When I told my father I loved him, she continued, he said I brought sin into his house. The night Ketan came to ask for my hand, they beat him before he spoke. I begged them to stop. My father stood there and watched. Her voice broke. He crawled into the woods and died under the tree where we used to meet. Elias said nothing. His jaw was tight, eyes bright in the firelight. I buried him myself, she whispered, with my hands. And I promised him I'd raise our child no love, even if the world called her sin. Silence filled the cabin again, heavy but sacred. The kind that doesn't need filling. Elias finally spoke, voice low. You've carried your faith farther than most who claim to have it. Sarah gave a small, broken smile. Maybe faith isn't about believing God is kind. Maybe it's about loving anyway. The fire burned down to embers. Willa murmured in her sleep, turning over. Grizz stretched, tail thumping once against the floor. Sarah leaned her head against the wall, exhaustion softening her edges. Elias watched her in a half-light, seeing the lines of her face more clearly now. Not pretty by the world's narrow standards, but strong in a way that made beauty look small. He thought of Naira, of how she had once laughed under these same stars, and felt something inside him shift. Not forgetting, not replacing, just room. He rose quietly, fetched another blanket, and laid it over Sarah's shoulders. For a moment, his fingers hovered near her hair, but he didn't touch it. Not yet. When he turned back to the fire, she whispered, half asleep, "You can rest, you know." His voice was gentle. "So can you." The next morning dawned pale and golden, sunlight dripping through frost-covered windows. Sarah woke to the smell of porridge and wood smoke. Elias stood at the stove, stirring with one hand, holding Willa in the other. The child giggled as he blew steam off the spoon and pretended to taste it first. Sarah sat up slowly, blinking at the scene. A man who hadn't smiled in years now making a fool of himself to make a child laugh. "You're awake," he said. "Figured I'd try not to burn breakfast." "You almost succeeded," she teased, noticing the singed edge of the pot. He chuckled, a low, rusty sound, like a door open that had long been shut. She joined him at the table. They ate in easy silence, broken only by Willa's chatter and Grizz's hopeful sniffing underfoot. When they finished, Elias set down a spoon and said quietly, "I haven't had company for breakfast in 9 years." Sarah smiled. "Then it's about time." Later that afternoon, while Willa napped, Elias opened the old cedar trunk beside his bed. Inside lay folded union letters, a battered medical kit, and a small pouch wrapped in deer hide. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a single silver earring, feathers and turquoise woven into its design. He turned it over in his palm, then looked toward Sarah. "She gave me this the night we married," he said. "I buried her wearing the other one." Sarah's eyes softened. "It's beautiful." "She wants someone like you to have it," Elias said, extending his hand. Sarah blinked, startled. "Elias, I'm not asking you to wear it for her," he said quietly. "I'm giving it because I couldn't protect her. But I can protect you." For a heartbeat, she couldn't speak. Then she reached out and closed her fingers around the earring, holding it tight. "I don't know what this means," she whispered. "It means," he said, "I won't let the world take from me again what it has no right to." She looked at him, and for the first time didn't see the mountain man the world feared, but the doctor, the husband, the man who still believed in life. That evening, the sunset painted the mountains in fire. Sarah stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, the earring warm in her palm. Elias joined her quietly, standing beside her as the wind moved through the pines. She said softly, "Do you ever think the dead see you, S?" He nodded. "Sometimes I think they're the reason we keep going." She smiled faintly. "Then they'd better be proud of what they started." He looked at her, at the woman who'd walked through a storm to bury her child and instead found life again, at the mother who carried grief and grace in the same breath. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. It was already his, in every way that mattered. 2 graves left unburied, one in his heart, one in hers. But when sorrow meets its reflection, something new grows, not to replace what was lost, but to remind us love can rise again, even from the coldest ground. The world after blood is quieter, but never clean. Smoke still clung to the rafters, ghosts rising from half-burnt beams. Outside, snow covered the blackened earth like mercy, trying to hide what men had done. Elias Boone moved with one arm in a sling, every motion careful. Sarah Whitmore worked beside him, her shawl pinned tight, her hair dusted white with ash. Between them stretched what was left of the cabin, 3 standing walls, a hearth still warm, and a promise neither yet dared to name. They began at dawn. Elias split logs, slow but steady. Sarah dragged them to frame, hammering nails until her hands blistered. When she faltered, he said nothing, just steadied the plank with his good arm. The rhythm became prayer. Swing, lift, strike, breathe. Willow watched from the steps, bundled in furs, humming to Grizz. Sometimes she clapped when a wall rose straight. Sometimes she simply stared, sensing what even children can feel, that work done together makes a family. By sundown, half the back wall stood again. Sarah leaned on her hammer, breath misting. "You should rest," she said. Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "Can't. Every board I set down, I remember the one they try to burn." She stepped closer. "You don't have to fight ghosts alone." He met her eyes, pale gray meeting amber, and nodded once. "Then don't leave me to." Over the next days, snow fell, melted, froze again. They patched the roof, replaced the shattered window panes with stretched hides. Sarah stitched curtains from flour sacks. Elias forged hinges from scrap iron. Sometimes they spoke of tools, of weather, never a fear. But each shared silence carried more meaning than words could hold. At night, Willa slept between them near the fire. Elias would wake to Sarah's breathing, soft and steady beside the child, and the memory of loss was dull enough for him to close his eyes again. One morning she caught him staring at the mountain's far ridge. "What are you thinking?" He smiled faintly. "That fences keep things out. Maybe it's time I build one to keep something in." When the last beam was raised, Elias opened his cedar trunk again. From its depths he drew the faded blue cloth once wrapped round his compass, the same that had bound his wounded hand. He handed it to her folded neat. "It belonged to Naira," he said. "I've carried it long enough. You keep it now." Sarah held it as though it might vanish. "She wants you to have it," he added. She believed saving a life ties souls together. Tears shimmered, but she didn't hide them. Then we're all knotted pretty tight. That evening the sky blazed red behind the pines. They sat by the new wall. The world glowed with that fleeting color between day and night. Elias's hand rested near hers on the step. Not touching, not distant, just near. "I came here to bury my child," she said quietly. He turned. "But you buried something else instead," she continued. "The fear that told me I'd die alone." He breathed out slowly. "And you dug something out of me I thought long gone, the will to build again." No vows followed, no kiss. Only the warmth of shared breath, and the slow crackle of a hearth rebuilt by 2 steady hands. When the thaw came, Elias took up his spade and began to dig. Sarah watched from the doorway, willow on her hip. He set the post in a long curve around the clearing, marking the boundary not of isolation, but belonging. Each strike of the hammer sounded sure rhythmic, the sound of permanence. At midday he paused, leaned on the handle, and looked back toward her. "You'll help me finish?" She smiled. "I already started." Behind her, a row of herbs grew in neat mounds of dark soil, sage, mint, and the rabbit tobacco that once saved their child. A fence to keep life in, a garden to keep it growing. That night, the fire burned low, throwing gold across the cabin's new boards. Willa dreamed beside Grizz. Sarah unwrapped the blue cloth and wound it around a jar of wildflowers, setting it on the table like a blessing. Elias sat nearby, eyes on the flame. "Never thought I'd build anything again," he murmured. She touched his arm gently. "You didn't just build a house, Elias. You built a home." He turned his palm over and caught her hand. For once, neither pulled away. From ashes they hammered walls. From loss they carved belonging. Every board, every breath, every heartbeat said what words had not. That love, when earned through pain, stands stronger than any fence. 12 winters had come and gone, Since that night the world nearly buried them. The mountains had changed little, still vast, still cold, still quiet enough to hear the wind's own heart. But the cabin at their base was no longer a place of exile. It was a home, warm, solid, filled with the soft noise of life. Smoke rose thin and blew from the chimney. Inside, the smell of pine resin and honey tea wrapped the air. Sarah Boone, for that was her name now, sat by the hearth writing in a cracked leather journal. Her hands had aged but remained steady, strong from years of tending fire and mending hearts. The day I came begging for someone to bury my child was the day something inside me died, she wrote. But Elias did not bury her. He breathed life into her, and somehow he did the same for me. Across the room, Elias Boone knelt beside an old Shoshone trapper, binding the man's wrist with fresh linen. He had gone gray at the temples. The lines around his eyes were deep but kind. His movements carried the same quiet precision as the surgeon he once was, though now his patients paid in stories and smoked salmon instead of coins. When he finished, the old man clasped his shoulder. "You still work like the army's watching." Elias smiled. "Just a mountain now." From outside came a girl's voice, quick, bright, sure. "Ma, the snowberries are early again." Willa Boone stood knee-deep in white, her dark braids swinging against her coat. At 12, she had her mother's warmth and her father's stillness, a balance rare and wondrous. A pouch hung from her belt, half filled with herbs. She spoke softly to the plants as she gathered them, as Elias had once taught her. When she turned toward the cabin, sunlight caught her face. Alive, laughing, unbroken. Grizz, now gray-muzzled, trailed faithfully behind. Inside, Sarah looked up from her writing, the corners of her mouth lifting. Elias watched too, something proud flickering in his eyes. "She moves like she belongs to the land," he said. "She does," Sarah replied. "And to us." By spring thaw, word of the Boones had spread through the valleys. Settlers rode half a day for a poultice. Tribesmen traded herbs for sugar and cloth. No one called him mad anymore. No one called her unclean. They were simply the mountain doctor and his wife, the ones who never turned anyone away. Sometimes, Sarah caught glimpses of strangers on the ridge. She recognized one, Thomas Everett, older, hollow-eyed, hat in hand. He never approached, just looked once, then turned his horse and rode down valley. She said nothing of it to Elias. Mercy didn't need an audience. That summer, Elias began carving again. Not tools, stories. He shaped animals for Willa, a wolf for loyalty, a hawk for freedom, a bear for courage. Then one evening, he took his knife and walked into the pines with Willa following. They stopped at an old tree near the clearing, thick, scarred, older than both of them. "What are you doing, P?" she asked. He smiled, marking something I don't want to forget. With slow, careful strokes, he carved words into the bark. "She's still breathing, and so am I." When he stepped back, the letters caught the gold of sunset. Willa traced them with her fingertips. "That's about me. It's about all of us," he said. When the first snow came that year, Sarah prepared stew and cornbread. Neighbors arrived, traders, trappers, and a few children from down valley. They filled the cabin with laughter and the smell of spice. Elias poured cider. Willa played a fiddle someone had traded for herbs, and Sarah felt the walls hum with warmth. She looked across the table at her husband, the one silent man who now smiled without shame, and thought of every mile she walked to find this place. He caught her gaze and, without a word, reached for her hand under the table. The old ache in her chest, the one that once screamed loss, went quiet. Weeks later, a rider brought mail from the valley. A single envelope, yellowed from travel. Sarah broke the seal carefully. It was from the church at Cottonwood Valley. A different pastor now. Inside was one line written in elegant script. Your father asked forgiveness before he died. We believe he found it. She folded the paper once, twice, then fed it to the fire. Elias watched, saying nothing. When the last ember turned black, she whispered, then let him rest. Years layered softly. Elias taught Willa medicine, the union of science and spirit, tincture and prayer. Sarah taught her words, how to write truth in ink and live it louder. Travelers who passed through the valley told stories of the Boone family, who healed without asking names. No one mentioned the night of blood or the storm or the man she'd once begged to bury her child. History had chosen mercy for once. One evening, as the sun set behind the Bitterroot Peaks, Willa found her mother's old journal open on the table. At the bottom of a page she read, some love stories do not begin with kisses. They begin with blood in the snow and end with warmth that never fades. She smiled and closed the book. Snow fell again, slow, steady, blessing instead of burden. Sarah sat by the fire, hair silver now, voice low as she hummed Comanche lullaby Ketan once taught her. Elias rested beside her, eyes half closed, one arm draped around her shoulders. Willa slept on the rug, Grizz's head resting across her feet. Outside the world was still. The mountain breathed in peace. Elias whispered, You remember what you told me that first night? That you came to bury your child. Sarah smiled faintly, and you said she was still breathing. He kissed her forehead. So are we. 12 years since sorrow knocked on a mountain door. The snow still falls, but not to bury, to bless. Some souls are not saved by miracles, but by mercy and the hands that refuse to let go. In the Bitterroot Wild, where love once froze, a fire still burns. She's still breathing, and so is he.